The Jester Classic is a bit of a mess, all things considered. If you own one and you load up a sports class race, you'll see it listed alongside the other Jesters, ready to be selected and used in sports class races. It's also in the sports class officially, as you can see from the bottom right when you get into the car. But when you load up a Sports Classics class race, while you won't see your owned version, you will see the stock version there alongside other stock Sport Classics, ready to be used in the Sport Classics class race. Even though when the race loads, it still shows as being in the Sports class in the bottom right. Now that the drift version of the Jester Classic has just been released today, we see some of this mess extend there too, because of course we do. As you can see when you drive into the mod shop, the Jester Classic is in the Sport class, but when you convert it into the drift version, it changes to being in the Sport Classics class. Again, you can see this in the bottom right or when you re-enter the mod shop. It will be selectable in Sport Classics races in its drift form, as long as you own it, and it is, for all intents and purposes, actually in the Sport Classics class. The drift version of cars do have their own separate models in-game, so it's not actually the same car anymore as the non-drift version is, so it can actually be in separate classes. We've just never seen it before. The drift version of a car has always shared the same class as its original version. When you remove the drift tune, the Jester Classic reverts back to being in the sports class. Like I said, it's a bit of a mess. But it always has been. This is essentially a holdover from Rockstar not doing a proper job back when the car was first released. So the Jester Classic was first added to the game with the San Andreas Super Sport Series DLC, and it was intended to release as part of that DLC's drip feed. In that case, it was in the Sport Classics class. But the model was so badly made and criticised so heavily by the community, who got access to it early to have a look, that it never actually released and remains the only vehicle ever added with a DLC's drip feed that didn't actually come out. It eventually did release as part of the next DLC, namely After Hours, with an updated and fixed model. However, it also got a change to its class, now being put in the Sport class instead of Sport Classics, because we absolutely needed another sports car. But Rockstar didn't do a proper job like they did with the recent class change for the Impaler SZ from sedans to muscle. In the race creator, the Jester Classic was still listed in the Sport Classics selection, and as I've mentioned, still is to this day. This means that the stock version of the car is available when selecting Sport Classics races from the in-game lobby, but the custom version, if you own one, can be raced in regular sports races because that's its official class. These are mutually exclusive as well, by the way. You can't race the stock version in sports races or the custom version in Sports Classics. They just didn't change the class everywhere they should have, basically, so it retains this leftover from when it was actually in the Sports Classics class for the original version of the car before it got fixed and subsequently moved to sports. And that's been the same since it released. Never fixed, never changed, never looked at. But as I mentioned, the drift version of the Jester Classic continues this messiness by being in Sport Classics by default. And this isn't anything related to how the drift tune removes all upgrades and treats the car as stock. Even if you were to add upgrades to the drift version, it would still be in the Sport Classics class. Just like the regular version is always in sports, even if you don't upgrade it. It's only in races that it's usable in the Sport Classics class in that instance. It definitely raises the question of whether the move to sports for the regular version back in 2018 was a mistake, or if this is a furthering of the mistake of not doing a proper job on the original change of class. Maybe the drift version of the car was copied from an earlier version or something, from when it was in the Sports Classics class. I mean, I haven't actually checked it myself, but it just occurred to me that it might be worth checking the model of the Drift Jester Classic for all those original issues that stopped the original version being released all those years ago. If it's using an original version of the car from before it had that class change, there's a good chance that it just has all the same issues that stopped the original version from being released. But yeah, the Jester Classic is a bit of a mess, and that's not to mention the whole naming system making no sense. You had the Dinka Jester being the new Honda NSX. You would think the Dinka Jester Classic would be the old Honda NSX, but nope, we didn't get that. It's a Toyota Supra instead. So then we get the Dinka Jester RR, which is the new Toyota Supra. So Dinka is now the equivalent of Honda and Toyota, and I'm not sure what that makes Karen. Now the Supra is what the Jester was in San Andreas, so that's probably why they ended up calling this the Jester Classic, but this car specifically definitely led to my lack of caring about tying in-game manufacturers and cars to real-world varieties. The GTA universe has its own thing, and there's no rules dictating that every car made by Dinka has to be equivalent to a real-world Honda, or every car made Karen has to be equivalent to a Toyota. It's all just made up anyway, it doesn't matter. But class inconsistencies and misallocations is something that I definitely do care about, and the Jester Classic has always been the messiest of them. Forever in two classes simultaneously. It just can't decide what it wants to be.